3 feet. That's all it was. 3 feet between 10-month-old Natasha and the man they called the Steel King, and every armed guard in that hallway stopped breathing. No footsteps, no radio static, no whispered warnings. Even the hum of the security cameras seemed to go silent. Rochelle's heart seized. She could see her baby's tiny hands gripping the marble floor, her chubby knees moving forward with that fearless determination only children have. But what really made Rochelle's blood run cold was his posture. Tae-ho Kang hadn't moved, his tattooed knuckles still resting on the conference table, but his eyes had shifted down to track every inch of Natasha's crawl. The strange thing was, he hadn't called for the guards. That thought terrified her even more. Tae-ho didn't speak. No shouting, no commands, nothing. Just those steel gray eyes fixed on the child moving toward him, like she was the only person in the building, like he was trying to understand a language he'd never learned. Rochelle's mind raced. You know that feeling when you realize your one mistake has just exposed you to something far more dangerous than being fired? That everything you've hidden is about to unravel? That's what crashed over her. Behind her, one of the junior cleaners whispered in horror, "Is that a baby?" Then came the sound of holsters unclasping, multiple weapons. Perfect. Now she was caught. The desperate gamble she'd made, bringing her daughter to work hidden in supply closets, had just blown up exactly like she feared. But here's what those guards didn't know. The man whose attention Natasha had just captured, he wasn't going to react the way anyone expected. And before I tell you what happens next, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you are watching from in the comment section. And trust me, Rochelle's entire world is about to transform in ways that will shock everyone in that mansion. Let me paint you the full picture of how a single mother and her fearless baby girl ended up changing the most dangerous man in Seoul. Rochelle's story didn't start in that hallway. It started 3 months earlier, in a supply closet that smelled like bleach and desperation. Most people don't know what it's like to be invisible, to scrub floors in a mansion where one painting costs more than you'll earn in your entire life, to walk past men in $1,000 suits who look through you like you're made of air. But Rochelle knew. She'd been invisible for 6 months. 6 months since she'd fled from Cameroon with Natasha strapped to her chest and nothing but a fake work visa in her pocket. 6 months of telling herself that if she just kept her head down, worked harder than anyone else, maybe she could build something here. The job at the Kang estate came through whispers and desperation. Her cousin's friend knew someone who knew someone. That's how it works when you're undocumented. You don't apply online, you don't negotiate. You take what you can get and pray they don't ask questions. You clean, you stay quiet, you never go above the 3rd floor, Mrs. Chen had told her on day 1, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Mr. Kang doesn't like to see the staff. If he sees you, you're gone. Rochelle had nodded. She was good at being invisible. But there was one problem she hadn't solved. Natasha. Daycare costs money she didn't have. The other cleaners would report a baby instantly. Too much liability, too much noise. And leaving Natasha alone in that tiny rented room across the city, that wasn't even an option. So Rochelle did what desperate mothers do. She got creative. The supply closet on the 2nd floor became Natasha's nursery. A nest of clean towels, soft rags to muffle sounds, a bottle and quiet toys. Rochelle would prop the door just enough to hear any cries, clean nearby rooms in record time, checking every 10 minutes. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was survival. For 2.5 months, it worked. Natasha was unusually quiet, watching the world with huge, dark eyes like she understood that silence meant safety. Sometimes Rochelle would peek in and find her daughter just observing, taking everything in with impossible calmness. "You're too brave for your own good," Rochelle would whisper during stolen moments, "just like your father." Then Mrs. Chen changed everything. "You're being moved. Executive floor. Starting tomorrow." Rochelle's stomach dropped. The executive floor, where Tae-ho Kang actually lived and worked, where cameras covered every corner and armed guards stood at every door, where there were no supply closets. That night, Rochelle sat on her floor holding Natasha close. Her daughter had just learned to crawl, those wobbly, determined movements that meant she could no longer stay in one spot. Rochelle had three choices: quit and starve, leave Natasha somewhere unsafe, or take the biggest risk of her life. The next morning, she showed up with her cleaning cart, and hidden beneath a false bottom of cardboard and fabric, Natasha lay wrapped in sound-muffling blankets. For 2 weeks, Rochelle became a master of fear. She memorized Taeho's schedule, learned which guards scrolled their phones, found camera blind spots. She moved like a ghost, parking her cart in odd corners, nursing Natasha in locked bathrooms, working faster than humanly possible. But she couldn't stop Natasha from growing braver, more curious, harder to keep still. This morning, Rochelle had whispered, "Please, baby, just one more day." Natasha had patted her face with tiny hands. Now, watching her daughter crawl towards those Italian leather shoes, Rochelle understood with crystal clarity. There was no other solution. This was always how it would end. Tae-ho Kang had built his entire empire on one principle: never show weakness. For 15 years, that principle had kept him alive. It had turned a street fighter from Busan into the man who controlled half of Seoul's underground. It had made rivals think twice, allies fall in line, and enemies disappear. He'd been shot 3 times, stabbed twice, and betrayed more times than he could count. Through all of it, his face never changed. Steel King wasn't just a nickname, it was a warning. So when Natasha's tiny hand wrapped around his ankle, Tae-ho did what he always did. Nothing. He stood perfectly still, his expression frozen in that carefully neutral mask he'd worn for so long it had become his real face. The guards waited for his signal. One word and they'd remove this situation. One gesture and the woman would be dragged away, the child taken to authorities, the problem erased. But Tae-ho didn't give the signal, because something impossible was happening. Natasha pulled herself up using his pant leg, her chubby fingers gripping the expensive fabric with surprising strength. She stood there on wobbly legs, looking up at him with those enormous dark eyes, and smiled. Not a scared smile, not a hesitant smile, pure joy, like she'd been searching for him specifically, like finding him was the best thing that had happened to her all day. Tae-ho felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, crack, like ice that's been solid for so long you forget it's just frozen water underneath. He'd seen every kind of look in his life. Fear, mostly. Hatred, greed, desperation. People looked at him and saw a weapon, a bank account, a threat, a solution to their problems. No one had ever looked at him like he was worth smiling at. Natasha made a sound, not quite a word, more like a happy babble, and reached both arms up, the universal gesture every parent on earth recognizes instantly. "Pick me up." Tae-ho's hands, which had held guns and signed death warrants and never once trembled, hesitated. "Sir?" One of the guards stepped forward, Should we? Don't. The word came out rougher than Taeho intended. In his peripheral vision, he saw the woman, the cleaner, he assumed, frozen against the wall. Her face was a mask of terror, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked like she was watching her entire world collapse. She probably was. But Taeho couldn't look away from the child. Natasha was still reaching, still smiling, completely unafraid of the man who made grown criminals wet themselves. Slowly, moving like he was defusing a bomb, Taeho crouched down. His knees protested. Too many fights, too many old injuries, but he lowered himself until he was eye level with Natasha. She immediately grabbed his face with both hands. The guards collectively held their breath. No one touched Taeho Kang. No one. Natasha patted his cheeks like she was checking if he was real, her expression serious now, concentrated. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. Something in Taeho's chest didn't just crack, it shattered. He'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Real warmth, not the artificial heat of expensive whiskey or the temporary fire of violence. This was different. This was a 10-month-old child deciding, for reasons he couldn't begin to understand, that he was safe. When was the last time anyone had thought he was safe? Taeho's hand moved on its own, coming up to steady Natasha's back. His palm covered most of her tiny frame. So fragile, so fearless. "What's her name?" His voice came out quieter than he'd spoken in years. From across the hallway, barely a whisper. "Natasha." Taeho looked up at the woman for the first time, really looked at her, saw the desperation, the exhaustion, the fierce maternal terror in her eyes, saw someone who'd been invisible by necessity, not choice. "Come here," he said. It wasn't a request. The whispers started before Rochelle even reached the executive floor the next morning. "Did you hear? Chen moved the African girl." "Not moved, promoted." "To what? She's a cleaner." "Not anymore." Rochelle kept her eyes down as she walked past the staff break room, but she could feel their stares burning into her back. 24 hours ago, she'd been nobody, invisible. Now she was the woman everyone was talking about. Mrs. Chen had summoned her to the office late yesterday, after Taeho had finally released Natasha and walked away without another word. Rochelle had expected termination papers, deportation threats, police. Instead, Mrs. Chen had slid a key card across the desk. "Executive floor, personal concierge duties. You'll attend to Mr. Kang's immediate needs during business hours." The older woman's face had been unreadable. "Your daughter stays with you. There's a room being prepared adjacent to his office." Rochelle had stared at the keycard like it might bite her. "I don't understand." "Neither do I, but Mr. Kang doesn't explain his decisions." Mrs. Chen's eyes had sharpened. "Don't make me regret vouching for you." Now, stepping off the elevator onto the executive floor, Rochelle felt like she'd entered a different world. The marble was whiter here, the art more expensive, the silence more absolute. And the guards, there were twice as many as before, all watching her with expressions that ranged from confusion to barely concealed hostility. She found the room Chen had mentioned. It was bigger than her entire apartment. A crib stood in the corner, high-end, the kind that cost months of her old salary, toys arranged neatly on shelves, a changing table stocked with supplies. Someone had prepared this, overnight. Rochelle's hands shook as she settled Natasha in the crib. Her daughter immediately pulled herself up, babbling happily, completely oblivious to how impossible this all was. "Miss Johnson." Rochelle spun around. One of the senior guards stood in the doorway, the tall one with the scar across his jaw. Kim, she thought his name was. "Mr. Kang is in conference room 3. He's requested coffee. The kitchen is down the hall. Someone will show you." It wasn't an offer. The kitchen staff barely looked at her as she prepared the coffee, but Rochelle caught the glances, heard the silence that fell when she entered. She'd worked in enough places to recognize jealousy when she saw it. She'd jumped the line, skipped years of hierarchy, gone from basement cleaner to executive floor in a single day, and nobody understood why. Honestly, neither did she. When Rochelle brought the coffee to conference room 3, she found Tejo sitting at the head of a long table, surrounded by men in expensive suits. The conversation stopped the moment she entered. Tejo didn't look up. Leave it. Rochelle set the tray down with shaking hands and turned to go. The child. She froze. Where is she? Still not looking at her, his attention on the documents in front of him. In the room you provided, sir. Bring her. The other men exchanged glances. One of them, silver-haired, clearly important, leaned forward. Tejo, we're in the middle of negotiations. I know what we're in the middle of. Tejo's voice carried that edge that made smart people stop talking. Bring her. Rochelle fled. When she returned carrying Natasha, the baby immediately squealed with delight at the sight of Tejo. Several of the men actually flinched at the sound. Set her down, Tejo said. Rochelle placed Natasha on the floor. Her daughter took off crawling immediately, making a beeline for Tejo's chair like yesterday had never ended. And Tejo, the Steel King, the man who'd built an empire on fear, reached down without breaking eye contact with the silver-haired man and lifted Natasha into his lap. Now, he settled the baby against his chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. Where were we? Tejo had negotiated billion-won deals while bleeding from a knife wound. He'd stared down rival bosses with guns pointed at his head. He'd built an empire on the ability to never blink first. But he'd never tried to close a shipping contract with a 10-month-old trying to eat his tie. Natasha had discovered the silk fabric dangling from his collar approximately 3 minutes into the meeting. Now she was gnawing on it with intense concentration, drool darkening the expensive material while making happy gurgling sounds. The men across the table looked like they were watching a nature documentary where the predator suddenly started playing with its food. As I was saying, Tejo continued, his voice steady even as Natasha grabbed a fistful of his hair, the terms you're offering are unacceptable. We both know the shipment is worth twice what you're claiming. Park Jin-woo, the silver-haired man who controlled the southern ports, couldn't seem to decide where to look. His eyes kept darting between Tejo's face and the baby currently using the Steel King as a jungle gym. Tejo, perhaps we should reschedule when you're less occupied. I'm not occupied. Tejo shifted Natasha slightly as she started sliding down his chest. I'm listening to you try to cheat me. Continue. One of Park's assistants made a choking sound that might have been a laugh. Here's the thing nobody expected. Natasha made Tejo better at this. Every time Park tried his usual intimidation tactics, the long silences, the hard stares, the barely veiled threats, his eyes would inevitably drift to the baby, and something about a grown man threatening someone while that someone held an infant who was fascinated by his cufflinks just didn't land the same way. Park broke first. He always did, but usually it took an hour. Today, it took 20 minutes. Fine, 15% higher, but that's my final offer. 20, Tejo said calmly, gently removing his Rolex from Natasha's grip before she could gum it to death. And you know it's fair. Park's jaw tightened. He looked at his associates, then back to Tejo, then almost involuntarily at Natasha, who chose that exact moment to pat Tejo's cheek and laugh. 20%, Park muttered. You're robbing me. I'm being generous. Tejo stood, supporting Natasha with practiced ease now. Jinwoo, pleasure doing business. The men filed out looking vaguely traumatized. As the door closed, Tejo heard one of them whisper, "Did that just happen?" Rochelle appeared in the doorway immediately, her face anxious. "I'm so sorry, sir. I tried to keep her quiet, but she heard your voice and—" "Don't apologize." Tejo looked down at Natasha, who was yawning now, her earlier energy fading. "She just made me 12 million won. I don't understand." "Neither do I," and that was true. Tejo couldn't explain why having Natasha in his arms made him sharper, calmer, more centered. Like her presence stripped away all the performance and left only the truth. No posturing, no games, just cold, clear logic. His enemies expected the Steel King. Instead, they got someone who didn't need to prove anything because he was too busy making sure a baby didn't choke on his cufflinks. It was the most effective negotiating tactic he'd ever discovered. Natasha's eyes were closing now, her head heavy against his shoulder. Tejo felt that strange crack in his chest widen a little more. "She trusts you," Rochelle said softly, wonder in her voice. "I noticed." Tejo carefully transferred Natasha to her mother's arms. The baby whimpered up a movement, but settled quickly. As Rochelle turned to leave, Tejo heard himself ask, "How does she do that?" "Do what, sir?" "Not be afraid. Of anything. Of me." Rochelle looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him, maybe for the first time since this impossible situation began. "Maybe," she said quietly, "she sees something the rest of us miss." It happened during Natasha's afternoon nap, 3 days later. Tejo found himself standing in the doorway of the nursery room, watching the baby sleep. He'd told himself he was just checking the security cameras in the hallway. Then he'd told himself he was reviewing the guard rotation. Then he'd run out of excuses for why he kept ending up here. Rochelle sat in the corner, folding tiny clothes with mechanical precision. She glanced up, startled to find him there. "Sir, do you need something?" What Tejo needed was an answer to the question that had been eating at him for 72 hours straight. How is she like this? The words came out rougher than he intended. Rochelle's hands stilled on a small pink shirt. "Sir?" "Your daughter." She crawled up to the most dangerous man in Seoul like he was handing out candy. She smiles at guards who would kill on command. She's not afraid of anything. Tejo stepped into the room, his voice dropping. "How?" For a long moment, Rochelle just looked at him. Then, slowly, she set down the laundry. "You want the truth?" "Always." She doesn't know she's supposed to be afraid yet. Rochelle's eyes drifted to her sleeping daughter. Natasha doesn't know that some people are dangerous. She doesn't know about power or hierarchy or survival. She just sees people. That's going to get her hurt. Maybe. Rochelle's voice carried an edge now, something sharp beneath the softness. Maybe the rest of us forgot how to see clearly. Maybe we're so busy being afraid that we miss what's actually in front of us. Tejo felt something shift in his chest. And what does she see when she looks at me? Someone who held her gently. Someone who didn't yell when she drooled on his expensive suit. Someone who makes her mother less afraid. Rochelle met his eyes directly for the first time. She sees someone worth trusting. I'm wrong. Is she? The question hung in the air like a challenge. You could have had us thrown out, deported, worse. Instead, you gave us a room, safety. You hold her during meetings like it's normal. So tell me, Mr. Kang, is she wrong about you, or are you wrong about yourself? No one had spoken to Tejo like this in 15 years. No one dared. He should have been angry, should have reminded this woman exactly who she was talking to. Instead, he found himself asking, her father, where is he? Rochelle's expression shuddered immediately. Gone. He promised everything and delivered nothing, left before she was born. Did you love him? I loved who I thought he was. Turned out I was seeing what I wanted to see, not what was real. And you think Natasha doesn't do the same with me? No. Rochelle stood, moving to check on her daughter with a mother's automatic care. Natasha just hasn't learned to be afraid of it yet. The question is, why does that terrify you so much? Tejo had no answer. In the crib, Natasha stirred, her tiny hand reaching out in sleep like she was searching for something. Without thinking, Tejo stepped forward and gently placed his finger in her palm. Her hand closed around it immediately, holding tight even in dreams. That crack in his chest split wider. "She's changing you," Rochelle whispered. "I know." Tejo stared at the small hand gripping his finger. That's the problem, because in his world, change meant weakness, and weakness meant death. But looking at Natasha's peaceful face, Tejo couldn't bring himself to pull away. The photographs arrived on a Tuesday. Lee Sang-min spread them across his desk in the back room of his gambling den, studying each one with the focus of a surgeon examining an X-ray. Tae Ho Kang holding a baby. Tae Ho Kang with a woman hovering nearby. Tae Ho Kang smiling, actually smiling at something the child had done. "When were these taken?" Sang-min's voice was ice. "Last week. Our contact on the cleaning staff got close enough with a phone. His lieutenant, a wiry man named Cho, leaned forward. The woman's name is Rochelle Johnson, undocumented worker from Cameroon. The baby is hers. Tae-ho moved them both to the executive floor 6 days ago." Sang-min picked up the clearest photo. In it, Tae-ho sat at his desk with the baby on his lap, the child grabbing at papers while he worked. The Steel King looked soft, distracted, human, vulnerable. "How long have we been trying to find a weakness?" Sang-min asked quietly. 3 years, sir. 3 years of watching Tae-ho Kang expand his territory, absorb their operations, turn their allies against them. 3 years of failed attempts to intimidate, bribe, or threaten the man who seemed to have no pressure points. No family, no lovers, no attachments. Until now. "He's kept them hidden," Cho continued, "but word is spreading among the staff. Some of the guards are talking. They say he brings the baby to meetings, carries her around like she matters to him." Sang-min set the photo down carefully. "Like she's made him forget what he is." The other men in the room shifted, sensing opportunity the way sharks sense blood in water. Tae-ho Kang had built his empire on being untouchable. No weaknesses meant no leverage. No leverage meant no way to negotiate, manipulate, or destroy him. But everyone had a weakness. Everyone. Some people just needed help finding theirs. "Do we know the security detail?" Sang-min asked quietly. 16 guards on rotation, cameras on every floor, bulletproof glass installed last year. The mansion is a fortress. Cho hesitated. "But there's a blind spot on the east wing during shift changes. 45 seconds, twice a day." 45 seconds. Sang-min smiled without warmth. "That's all we need." One of his men spoke up, uncertainty in his voice. "Sir, if we move on Kang directly, we risk—" "We're not moving on Kang." Sang-min gathered the photographs into a neat stack. "We're moving on what he cares about. There's a difference." The room went quiet as understanding settled over them. "The woman and child," Cho said slowly. "You want to take them. I want Tae-ho Kang to know what it feels like to lose something. For 3 years, that man has taken everything from us. Territory, revenue, respect. He's operated like he's bulletproof because nothing touches him. Nothing matters." He held up the photo of Tae-ho smiling at the baby. "But this matters. Look at his face. That's not the Steel King. That's a man who's forgotten to guard his heart. Sangmin's smile widened. "And that's when we strike." "When?" Cho asked. "Soon. But first, I want to know everything about Rochelle Johnson. Where she came from, why she's there, what she means to him." Sangmin leaned back in his chair. "Because when we take her and that baby, I want Tae-ho Kang to understand exactly what he's losing. I want him to feel it." In the photograph, Natasha's tiny hand rested against Tae-ho's cheek. Sangmin traced the image with one finger. Everyone breaks eventually, even kings made of steel. The first gunshot shattered the east wing window at 11:47 p.m. Tae-ho was in his office reviewing contracts when the glass exploded inward. His body moved on instinct, 15 years of survival reflexes taking over before his mind could catch up. He was on the floor, hand reaching for the gun in his desk drawer when he heard it. Natasha, screaming. The second shot took out the hallway camera. Then came the sound of boots, multiple sets, moving fast through corridors they shouldn't have known. The power cut. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red. Tae-ho ran. He'd navigated war zones calmer than this, had walked into ambushes with steady hands and clear thoughts, but hearing Natasha's cries echoing through the darkness did something to him that bullets never had. It made him afraid. The nursery door hung open. Inside, Rochelle had Natasha clutched to her chest, pressed into the corner behind the crib. Her eyes found Tae-ho's in the red emergency light, wild with terror. "How many?" Tae-ho's voice was pure steel even as his heart hammered. "I don't know. 3, maybe 4. They're in the building." Tae-ho crossed the room in 2 strides. "Give her to me." "What?" "Now." Rochelle handed over Natasha. The baby was hysterical, her face wet with tears, tiny body shaking. The moment Tae-ho took her, something shifted in him. Every tactical instinct he'd honed over 15 years crystallized into one single directive: protect this. Another window shattered somewhere below, voices shouting in Korean, orders being given, positions being called. Professional, organized. This wasn't random violence. This was an execution. "Stay behind me," Tae-ho ordered Rochelle. He moved to the door, Natasha pressed against his chest with one arm, gun in his free hand. Every muscle in his body screamed wrong. He needed both hands free, needed to move fast, needed to not be holding a baby while people with automatic weapons hunted through his home. But putting her down wasn't an option. They moved through the hallway in near darkness. Tae-ho's security team was engaging the intruders. He could hear the firefight 2 floors below, the distinctive crack of his guards' weapons mixing with the attackers' heavier artillery. "The panic room," Rochelle whispered behind him. "Don't you have—" "East Wing, where they came in." Tae-ho's mind raced through options, discarding each one. The main stairs were exposed. The elevator was a death trap. The only way out was through the servants' passage that led to the garage. They'd have to go down. Tae-ho started moving, keeping low, one hand supporting Natasha while the other kept his gun ready. This was impossible. He couldn't fight like this, couldn't move like this. Every combat instinct he had was being overridden by the need to keep the baby steady, quiet, safe. The Steel King had become a shield. They made it to the stairwell when the door at the bottom exploded open. A man in tactical gear appeared, weapon raised. His eyes went wide, seeing Tae-ho crouched on the landing, baby in his arms. That moment of hesitation cost him. Tae-ho fired once. The man dropped. But his radio crackled to life. "Target located. North stairwell. He's got the package." The package. They weren't here to kill him. They were here for Natasha. Tae-ho pulled Rochelle and Natasha behind a support column as bullets tore through the space where they'd been standing. Plaster exploded. Metal screamed. The world reduced to gunfire and Natasha's terrified cries, and Rochelle's prayer in a language Tae-ho didn't understand. He'd been in worse situations, tighter spots, longer odds, but he'd never had something to lose before. The silence after gunfire is always louder than the shots themselves. Tejo's ears rang as he pressed himself against the column, Natasha and Rochelle tucked behind his body. His shoulder burned, grazed by a bullet, nothing serious, but the blood was already soaking through his shirt. Below them, footsteps retreated, shouting in the distance. His security team had pushed the attackers back. For now. "Are they gone?" Rochelle's voice shook. "They're regrouping." Tejo shifted, checking the stairwell. 3 bodies, all intruders. His team had responded faster than the attackers expected. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they try again." Natasha had stopped screaming. That should have been a relief, but the silence was worse. Tejo looked down and saw her staring at him with those huge, dark eyes, red-rimmed from crying, her small body still trembling. She reached for his face with one tiny hand. Tejo became aware of what he must look like. Blood on his shirt, gun in his hand, face hard with the kind of cold fury that made grown men confess to crimes they didn't commit. He was everything her mother had tried to protect her from. Violence made flesh, danger in expensive clothes. Natasha's fingers touched his cheek anyway. She didn't pull back, didn't flinch, just patted his face gently, like she was checking if he was hurt, like she was trying to comfort him instead of the other way around. "Sir, your shoulder," Rochelle's voice shook. "It's nothing." But Tejo couldn't look away from Natasha. Even now, even after watching him kill a man, even covered in plaster dust and terror, she was reaching for him, trusting him. The crack in his chest that had been forming for days finally broke open completely. "Why?" The word escaped before he could stop it. "Why doesn't she hate me?" "Because you saved us." Rochelle's hand found his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "You could have run. You could have let them take us and saved yourself. But you didn't." Footsteps on the stairs below. His head of security appeared, weapon ready. "Sir, we've secured the perimeter. 4 hostiles down, 2 escaped. We need to move you to—" The man stopped, staring at the scene. Tejo Kang, the Steel King, crouched in a stairwell covered in blood and dust, holding a baby who was patting his face while her mother clung to his arm. "Get them to the safe room," Tejo ordered, his voice hoarse. "Maximum security. No one goes in or out without my authorization." "Sir, you need medical." "After." Tejo stood carefully, Natasha still in his arms. She'd grabbed a fistful of his bloodied shirt and wasn't letting go. "Who sent them?" "We're still identifying the bodies, but the tattoos, Lee Sang-min's crew." Of course, Sang-min had been circling for months, looking for an opening. And he'd found it, found the one thing in the world that could make Tejo Kang vulnerable. They reached the safe room, reinforced steel, independent air supply, enough supplies to last a week. Tejo finally, reluctantly, transferred Natasha to Rochelle's arms. The baby whimpered, reaching back for him. "I'll be right outside," Tejo promised. To Natasha, to Rochelle, to himself. As the door sealed, Rochelle caught his hand through the narrowing gap. "Thank you for not letting go of us." Tejo looked at his bloodied hand in hers. "I don't think I can anymore." The door clicked shut. Outside, his lieutenant was waiting with a tactical report and a first aid kit. "What are your orders, sir?" Tejo's jaw tightened. Someone had come into his home, had threatened what was his, had made Natasha scream in terror. "Find Lee Sang-min, and make sure he understands what happens when you touch my family." It took 18 hours to find Lee Sang-min, another 6 to make him understand his mistake. Tejo didn't ask questions, didn't negotiate, just made sure Sang-min knew exactly what happened to people who targeted children. By the time he was done, every crew in Seoul had gotten the message. The Steel King had a family now, and touching them meant death. Not quick death, not clean death, the kind of death that became a warning. When Taeho finally returned to the mansion, dawn was breaking over the city. His knuckles were split, his shoulder properly bandaged now, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. He should have gone to his quarters, should have showered, slept, let his body recover. Instead, he found himself outside the safe room, entering the code with bloodied fingers. The door opened silently. Inside, Rochelle was asleep in a chair, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. But Natasha was awake in her crib, standing with both hands gripping the rail, watching the door like she'd been waiting. The moment she saw Taeho, her face split into that smile, that impossible, fearless smile. She reached for him. Taeho crossed the room and lifted her out, cradling her against his chest. She immediately grabbed his collar, babbling softly, patting his face like she had in the stairwell, checking on him. "You shouldn't trust me this much," he whispered. "I'm not a good man, Natasha." She laughed, actually laughed, like he'd told her the funniest joke in the world. Taeho felt something settle in his chest. Not the crack, that was already broken. This was something new, something warm filling the empty space where ice had lived for 15 years. "She waited up for you." Taeho turned. Rochelle was awake now, watching them with red-rimmed eyes. "I told her you'd come back," she continued quietly, "but I think she already knew." "How could she know?" "Because you promised." Rochelle stood, moving closer. "And she believes you." Taeho looked down at Natasha, who was now trying to eat his collar. "I killed people tonight, probably ruined lives, definitely broke laws. I know what you are." Rochelle's voice was steady. "I've always known. But I also know what you did. You could have handed us over, used us as bargaining chips, saved yourself and let them take us. That was never an option. Why not?" The question hung in the air. Taeho had asked himself the same thing 100 times in the past 18 hours. Why had he risked everything? Why had he compromised his tactical position? Why had he fought with one hand tied behind his back? He looked at Natasha, at this tiny, fearless creature who'd decided he was worth smiling at. He said finally, "Because she saw something in me that I'd forgotten was there," he said finally, "and I couldn't let her be wrong." Rochelle's eyes filled with tears. "So what happens now?" Taeho had built his empire on being alone, on having nothing to lose and everything to gain, on being steel, unbreakable and cold. But steel could be reforged. Now, he adjusted Natasha in his arms, feeling her small weight settle against his heart. "I'm stopping pretending I don't have a family. You and Natasha aren't hiding anymore. You're not staff. You're mine to protect." "Taeho," he whispered, "I'm adopting you both, officially. Papers, lawyers, everything legal." His voice carried that edge that made smart people stop arguing. "Anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me, and after last night, I don't think anyone's that stupid." Rochelle stared at him. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Natasha chose that moment to grab his nose, giggling when he pretended to bite her fingers. "She saved you," Rochelle whispered, wonder in her voice. "A 10-month-old baby saved the Steel King from his own cold heart." Taeho smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. "No," he said, pressing a kiss to Natasha's forehead. "She reminded me I still had one." Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is see someone for who they could be, not who they've been forced to become. Rochelle didn't set out to change anyone. She was just trying to survive, hiding her daughter in supply closets, staying invisible, doing whatever it took. But 10-month-old Natasha, she had other plans. She saw past the Steel King's reputation, past the violence, past the fear everyone else carried. She saw someone worth smiling at. And that changed everything. Was it reckless? Absolutely. Should a mother have trusted her child to a man built from danger? Maybe not. But here's what I keep thinking about. What if the people we write off as monsters are just waiting for someone brave enough to see them differently? Tae-ho Kang had everything: power, money, fear, respect. But he had nothing that mattered until a baby girl decided he was worth crawling toward. She didn't ask his permission, didn't wait for him to prove himself. She just trusted him. And sometimes that's all it takes. One fearless moment. One person who refuses to see you as steel and insists on finding the heart underneath. So here's my question. Can people really change? Or do they just need someone who believes they can? Drop your thoughts below. Was Natasha's trust foolish or prophetic? Did Tae-ho deserve this second chance? And would you have been brave enough to let a dangerous man hold your child? If this story reminded you that transformation is possible, hit subscribe. I'm here every week with stories about unlikely families, impossible choices, and the fearless love that changes everything. Because the best stories aren't about perfect heroes, they're about broken people choosing to be whole. Until next time, stay dangerous. Silence Speaks Story, where every story leaves a mark.